What's going on, good people? It's been a minute since I've talked to y'all. I've been hiding out, I guess, as they would say, But in the last week or so, I've actually been watching a lot of docs, just, hanging out with my lady and all that. And we've just been watching a whole bunch of these docs that I just never got the chance to watch. So the first one I'm going to start with, and they're all great, actually, they're really all very good, is Wu Tang of Mikes and Men. If you haven't seen it, I totally recommend watching it. I really do. I think it's a phenomenal doc. It really gets into sort of the history and the energy and sort of the beginnings of Wu Tang and how they came in and how they fell off. I think it's a phenomenal doc. My one criticism is it doesn't actually spend any time at all really talking about Supreme Clientele. And I think that that was such a monumental album for Wu Tang, given where they were in the 2000s, that I would have loved to see some sort of coverage or talk about it. But it is a very good doc. It's interesting because for the first time, even though I've been listening to Wu Tang since first time I heard them, '98 maybe, the Wu Tang, the first Wu Tang album, and there's certain things I just never really understood that now are clarified for me. Like I never understood who Oil Power was. Like there was in terms of Wu Tang management, there was a guy Oil Power, and then how he was different from Divine, and I was like, who are these dudes? But it's interesting to finally see RZA's brother Divine speak out on who he was and what he brought to the table, and how Mook and Oil Power and those guys got involved as well. So it's really fascinating to see sort of the nuts and bolts behind what put Wu together. I totally recommend you watch the doc. You really do see the brilliance of RZA and the entire team, how they put together. And I think that in a lot of ways, it really shows that RZA was ahead of the curve. He was a very smart guy. And I think it does paint him in a very good light, in the sense especially that he basically sort of he had this idea, this grand vision, and he rocked out, and it was great for a while. But then some of the other members started grumbling, and then he was like, you know what? Okay, and he did release them, and that was the humane thing to do. If that's how the doc, if what the doc says is true. I'm sure there are other things behind the scenes about it, but in essence, RZA and his brother end up looking good for doing that. So I totally recommend that. Now, the other doc that I watched was the Stretch and Bobbito doc, which is phenomenal, very fantastic doc. What's so fascinating to me about the Stretch and Bobbito doc is just the sheer amount of talent that these guys had coming through. Literally the greatest rap acts of the 90s, the ones that you respect, the ones that people still talk about today. They all came through this one radio show. I think that is unreal. Like that's unreal, and especially from New York, of course. But the fact that they had Wu, Nas, Mobb Deep, Jay, Big L, like Tribe Called Quest, DMX. I'm forgetting someone, that I'm sure is MF Doom. Like they just had all these people who were not signed. A lot of them who were, not even remotely signed, and they came through, and there was just this cluster of unreal talent. It goes to show you, man, that this hip hop shit, when I watched it, it was sort of sad because to me, it was like, man, hip hop really peaked in the 90s, in the mid 90s. And I remember those days. Oh, Mace. Mace came through. See, you have to understand, the first time I started listening to rap seriously, not, I had heard rap before, but I don't count that shit. Like, you hear rap as a kid, you don't get it. You know what I'm saying? Like, yes, you can grow up in rap and hear stuff, but really, when you're a teenager, you're starting to become a teenager. That's the first time you really start to actually think about what you're hearing on some level. And the rapper that made me sort of go like, what am I actually hearing right now? Was Mace. I listened to Mace because I started listening to rap seriously in '97. And Mace was, that was the end of that era, man, where you had to really spit on some level. And to be fair, I was catching the tail end of this hip hop shit because really hip hop had kind of died in a way by the time I got to it in '97. Like that sort of Nas and like Wu Tang and Big, like that was kind of where the apex. You could tell, like just in terms of the concepts, the lyricism, the beats, like it kind of just peaked then. And you really feel it. Like just that sort of intellectual hunger, that desire to really say the craziest and deepest and most profound shit that you could think of. Like that energy has not been in hip hop since the mid 90s. And it may never come back. I hope it does, but it may never come back. And that's the sad thing. You kind of look and go like, damn, this culture peaked. It really did, man. I just cannot, like, it's laughable to me when people talk about these like rappers now being lyricists and shit. And I'm just like, you just don't see it. You don't hear it. The intellectual hunger, that sort of poetic brilliance, that desire to just spit the craziest shit just isn't there. These dudes is coming at it. They're rapping about the same old shit everyone else is rapping about. With dumbed down, dumbed down bars. Dumb bars. You be hearing it like, this is supposed to be bars. It's structured as a bar. But it's the dumbest shit you've ever heard of before. At least for me, it's super dumb compared to what I grew up listening to. So, yeah, man, I watched the Bobbito doc. That shit was a little sad. Like, I grew up in that era, man. Like, at least I caught the tail end of it. And it's interesting because even though I caught the tail end of it, I didn't really understand this rap shit until I started really listening to the mid 90s stuff. And I was just like on the cusp and the edge. I had to go back and listen to this stuff and then go back and then go back. And then I was like, oh, this is what this hip hop shit is really about. So I can only imagine the people that haven't even gone past 2015. Because there are people listening to rap right now that only know about, let's say, 2013 moving forward, which is fucking insane to me. Or the people that, quote unquote, are heads and only have heard a couple of things in the 90s, Lil Wayne in the 2000s, and then like this stuff now. And so, of course, they think Griselda and Kanye and all this shit, this cornball shit is hot because their frame of reference is so small. So I recommend the Stretch and Bobbito doc if you really want to kind of see that lyricism, that hunger, that it does not exist in rap at all. Like that shit is completely gone. It is completely gone. At least with rap, I can say that I still love the beats. Like a beat will come by and I'll be like, oh, that's a really dope beat. And every now and then you get like a Pop Smoke who actually has the vocals and the confidence to pull it off. Every now and then. It's rare. But at least that comes out every now and then. Lyricism has not come back. Lyricism is dead. It's been dead. It's been dead since probably the early 2000s. I mean, I cannot think of a single rapper, after maybe Mos Def, and again, on Stretch and Bobbito show, I can't think of a single new rapper that was like, yo, I cannot believe what this dude is saying lyrically. Like, really, they've put the time and they've written down the pen and it's freaking incredible. Can't think of one. That shit is dead, B. It's dead. Dead. When you guys talk about, Pusha T and Big Sean and shit, I just laugh. The pen is trash compared to what I'm used to hearing. But anyway, Stretch and Bobbito doc. Definitely worth the watch. I think it's interesting how they said that they actually, not only did they not make any money off the show, but they lost money, putting that show on, which is wow. Talk about that, man. A show that has put every major rapper in the last 20 years on that you respect never made a dime. Meanwhile, you got Hot 97, you got Power 105 and stuff who didn't really contribute as much to the culture, at least from what I can see with the doc, in terms of bringing out new talent. And these are billion-dollar companies. That's life, I guess. Yeah, I guess that's just how these things go. The last and third doc I want to talk about is Hip Hop Evolution. Hip Hop Evolution is an interesting doc because I know a few people involved with that doc. Like in passing, I don't know them, like we're not friends or anything like that, but they are Toronto guys who have made some really interesting stuff, actually, I have to say, with this doc. And they've put it together. And I've met a couple of them just at like the library or whatever, and when they're putting the doc together. And I think it really is very interesting to see how they've charted the evolution of hip hop. The series is quite good. They're at four seasons now, and they have a very sort of wide approach and try to look at the entire scene from the East Coast to the West Coast to the South. The Memphis stuff was great. So I like the doc. I think it's actually a very good doc. They've managed to get interviews with just about everybody. And I think it's done well. The only thing that rubbed me the wrong way when I watched it was I watched the part on Run DMC, and I thought it was absolutely insane that no one mentioned Larry Smith. I was just like, what the fuck? I also thought it was insane that they didn't talk about Whodini either. Like, how does that not come up in conversation? It's almost kind of like an outsider made that or wrote that one part. Because it's like, how do you talk about Run DMC without talking about Larry Smith, but then mention Rick Rubin and spend all this time on Rick Rubin? When that whole rock aesthetic, Larry Smith did that for Run DMC before Rick Rubin came into the picture, from what I understand. And even the whole Rick Rubin, the song that he gets props for, "It's Yours," as sort of coming into the game with this crazy beat. He did that with Jazzy J, and I always think, I think that's interesting. It's like the white guy and the brother make a song together. They program the beat together, at least according to what Jazzy J is saying, if what he's saying is true. But then we only talk about Rick Rubin as this genius producer, and no one ever talks about the fact that Jazzy J helped produce Rick Rubin's first major record, the one that got him the whole props to begin with. Like, again, that's that racism, white supremacy 101 shit, man, and it's annoying. But what are you gonna do? You just try to survive. So I think the doc is great. The production techniques that they go into in some of these episodes, in terms of Marley and, like, again, the Memphis stuff, the super producers, it's all pretty interesting things. It's sort of surface level to a certain degree. They're not really going super, super deep with it. But I do think it's a great place to start in terms of trying to understand, like, the progressions of hip-hop culture. Again, man, you watch this stuff and you go, like, what's the legacy? What's the 2000s, the 2010s going to be remembered for? Because honestly, it's looking weak. It's looking super weak. Like, these guys that came out in the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s, although a lot of the production techniques and the styles, even now, that trap shit, that 3-6 Mafia shit, I mean, that's a style from 1994 that it's just updated. So there's really no new sort of, like, really new styles in hip hop where you're just like, oh my God, like, this region just came out with some type of music I never heard before. It's not happening, right? I love Rocky, but Rocky's sort of style of music, especially the 3-6 Mafia shit he does, is 3-6 Mafia or early 3-6 Mafia updated to today. People weren't really doing that, in the early 2010s, and that's what made Rocky really stand out, or one of the things that made him stand out. But again, it's not like he invented that style. I mean, that style existed before Rocky. It's an old fucking style. So what I'm trying to say is, who are the new dudes who are doing some real next level shit? The only person I've ever heard that's made some next level type of beats, honestly, I have to always say, is Clams Casino. I've literally heard Clams Casino shit and been like, what is this? And obviously that cloud rap, and I always give props to cloud rap because that's really the first thing I've ever heard that just sounded like some completely, like, new shit. Like, it took me a minute to kind of wrap my head around. But those docs are great to watch, and you kind of see the progression. Again, hip hop is kind of running on fumes, man. These new niggas is not doing nothing. They're really not. They don't have interesting beats that, sometimes they do, of course, but, like, in terms of, like, a completely new sound, a completely new beat that could just kind of take over, and you're just like, oh my God, right? Like a completely new vibe and shit. Like, they're not really coming with it like that. Vocally they're not there, and especially lyrically, they ain't got shit to say. It's pop music. It's watered down. It's done. So it's sad, but that's kind of what I took away from these docs, that this culture is kind of, hit its apex. Anyway, I'm going to talk to y'all later. Next video, I think I'll talk about Drizzy. Now, sure. I think a lot of y'all will probably enjoy that. And some, of course, will be furious, but that's just how it is. Anyway, peace.